This is Siki Langa for Indigenous Languages Action Forum. Welcome to Indigenous Languages Action Forum Conversations. And today we have a conversation with Dr. Zakeera Docrat, who's also our chair. So today our topic is the recent event that's just happened. Dada Morero, the mayor of Johannesburg, made a huge call and said he wants foreign nationals to now be part of the police force because they speak the languages. There was a huge uproar, and our chair is an expert on forensic linguistics. So she responded to a journalist who was commenting on it, and she said, there's research on it. So we would love to hear what you have to say about this big drama that just hit the country.
Good afternoon, Siki.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Siki, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to this very important issue. I think, firstly, it was going to happen. Let's be honest. Where somebody was going to make a statement of this nature, and where better to have made the statement than the mayor himself in a geographical area which we know from a language planning perspective has been so problematic because it's so multilingual and so diverse. And there's no policy really, a one-size-fits-all policy that we can implement in this part of South Africa. That's the first point I'd like to make. And, it gives rise, Siki, to just so many issues because we've had these discussions before on the ILAF platform through various other media forums like The Conversation and at various conferences where we speak about police and interpreting and statement taking and the crisis that us as ordinary South Africans are facing when we enter a police station and we try to lay a charge or converse with a police officer. So there's a multitude of issues going on at the same time. But before I get into that, I don't know if you've seen recently in the media, Siki, that there have been discussions following the mayor's statement and then his detraction. And those arguments, those debates ranged around, again, politics. It ranged around foreign nationals. And again, the xenophobic element emerged.
Yes.
So I'm not excluding that. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that the language issue then suddenly got lost again.
Yes, and
was
it gets
watered down.
overtaken. Yes.
Exactly. And I think what's important here is now that we've got this opportunity, we need to discuss it. So as much as the Joburg mayor has detracted the statement, I think it's still worth engaging with and explaining what are the issues really at play here today.
Because it's not going to go away.
No, we can't just have these conversations and then suddenly file it away somewhere and then think, okay, we've dealt with it, it's done. That's not how it works, Sigi. Language is a fluid, I don't want to say entity, but it's so fluid and it's part of who we are. It's part of our identity. And I mean, we're talking here in Heritage Month. So it's part of our heritage as well. So it's bound to come up somewhere along the line, whether it's through national politics and debates, as we've seen, whether it's in the criminal justice system, other spheres of society. Language is inherent of who we are as people. And I think especially when we get to South Africa, because as I said in the beginning, we're so multilingual and we're so diverse. So, we're bound to butt heads with each other in a sense and say, well, my language is more superior than yours, and really argue about the status of our languages.
But in this case, though, I know that in previous conversations where, even forensic linguistic conferences, there've been presentations about language and the law, because one of the issues that were discussion points about this was that, for example, they say that one of the reasons that the mayor wanted foreign nationals to get involved or to be employed is because, let's say somebody commits a crime or anything, then before the police, they come to the police to the police office, and then before they speak to the police to report the case or whatever the issue is, they speak among themselves in their own language, and nobody knows what they're saying. And then one thing is being reported, and another is being said, and so they feel like even the pre-conversations. So that's why they wanted someone there who will understand what's being spoken, so to make the cases more manageable. And I know that I've listened to some of the or some of the things that have been presented before, that there are cases in this country that have not been solved purely because there's nobody who can speak that language. So will you please speak into those issues?
Okay, yes, no, I hear you, Siki, and I've heard these conversations happening based on what the Joburg mayor said. And I was thinking very carefully after he made the statement. The same thing is happening with the South African languages. So it's not only a foreign issue. If he's saying that there's sort of a collusion, I think he alluded to, like you said, between suspects before the statements are taken, that can happen with ordinary South Africans as well. When we walk into a police station, our police officers are not multilingual in the sense that they can speak all our 12 official languages in South Africa. And we cannot expect that of them. I mean, we don't certainly speak 12. So we can't expect a police officer to be so multilingually diverse in a police station with limited capabilities. So again, it's how we look at it. Through what lens are we assessing it? Is it a foreign issue or is it a South African issue? So I think that is the first thing we need to identify and say, this is also inherent of us as South Africans. It's not only a foreign-based issue. And if we take it then a step further, it gives rise to issues like interpretation in the police station. It's giving rise to the capabilities and the competencies of our police officers and their training. It's giving rise to forensic linguistics and our role as forensic linguists in the criminal justice system more broadly. Excuse me. So these are the issues at play again, and this is why I commented when it was being discussed online on X to say there is research that's being done. But to unpack the first issue of statement taking with the police, this is a challenge. This is nothing new to us in South Africa. We've been trying to address this for a long time. Our research has been constantly ignored. The primary issue with the statement taking is the police don't have the linguistic qualifications and competencies. In a recent advert last year, looking for police officers, if you wanted to apply to be a police officer, for the first time it said that you have to have an English language competency, and it would be advantageous if you could speak an additional South African language. Just fantastic. We hadn't had that before. There was no mention of language. But it didn't say at what proficiency, Siki. You and I speak English. English is my mother tongue. It's as close as yours. We speak at different levels. It's close as a second language for me. Proficiency varies. Because it's your mother tongue doesn't mean that you are qualified to be an interpreter. So again, do we expect our police to be interpreters at the same time? That is also a question we need to answer. And from a point of research, definitely not. That cannot be done.
So would you say then, should there be interpreters, qualified interpreters that work at a police station 24/7?
I mean, that would be ideal if we're living in a utopian society. It would also be ideal in a South African society to give effect to all our languages. And when we look from a point of legislation and policy, Siki, the police language policy makes allowance for interpreters to be stationed in the police stations. And unfortunately, the policy then goes further to say this is subject to budgetary constraints, which we know is always built into policy and legislation. So, the policy takes a positive step and then sort of takes a back seat again to say, but just be careful, subject to the budgetary constraint, which is again difficult, and the police ministry will have to look into this going forward, because as we said, these issues cannot be avoided. But yes, from a point of practice, to answer your question, an interpreter stationed in the police station would be ideal. But again, Siki, I'm going to be provocative here with you and say, which languages are we going to go with? Because in the Eastern Cape, where you and I are based, it's very easy. We can go with English, Afrikaans, and isiXhosa, and depending where geographically, Sesotho. But when we're getting now to Gauteng, then it becomes more problematic. So again, a one-size-fits-all policy doesn't work. We've got to look at regional circumstances, and this has been done, and it's something I've spoken about for a long time, since my PhD, in fact, to say policies need to be specific to provinces. That's what we need. And
Well,
again, this is fluid, Siki. This is changing. So we need to take into account the language demographics. It will be different a police station situated in the city center in Johannesburg, depending on who it's serving, to a police station, let's say, in a suburb where the majority speak English as a mother tongue. You're dealing with a different type of South African citizen in terms of linguistic competencies.
at the same time, though, I do want to say that it does look like the linguistic landscape is shifting. Even if I look at, let's say, London, or maybe even Mthatha, there are foreign nationals in these cities. So one would argue that all of these stations need some kind of foreign interpreter of sorts.
Look,
But then it's like, how do you even measure it? Because, we have all the world's languages, right? It's like, do we even have a system that's where we've got stats, where these languages, where we know what type of languages are majority spoken, or what kind of foreign languages we have in a high concentration of, especially when you're dealing with illegal immigrants that are a part of the system. How do you even quantify it to find that, to be able to control something like that, and to be able to serve a community with multiple languages where maybe sometimes people are not registered.
No, I mean, that's so true, and you raise it. And again, it goes to, so which languages would we choose, Siki? Would we choose Mandarin? From an international perspective, would we choose Portuguese? Would we choose Arabic, Gujarati, Hindi? And then, from the African languages, I'm talking regional languages, do we go with SADC languages only because we're in Southern Africa? Or are we going with languages from West Africa? Again, as you suggest, it's going to be based on the language demographics in the province in which the police station is based. But that is fluid. So I'm not quite sure then Stats SA would have to come into play here and provide us as language planners and forensic linguists with the statistics to say, okay, in this area, we have so many speakers of Mandarin, we have so many speakers of Kiswahili, and we have so many speakers of isiZulu, the South African language. I'm just saying, as an example. I mean, then are we dealing with now employing 3 or 4 interpreters in a police station and hoping that they would be able to affect change? And then what about everybody else that's entering the police station? I think we also need to be aware of the fact that there can be a crime committed against you and I in another province, and we don't speak Setswana, or we don't speak Sepedi. But we
Mm,
then are in that police station.
that's so
So
true.
who's going to assist us if we can only speak isiXhosa?
Mm. Or maybe you're in Limpopo, you know?
That's it.
Yeah. So let's say you were the advisor for Dada Morero, mayor. What would you have advised him as to solve his problem? Uh, if there is no human problem, do we have technology that is able to sufficiently translate in the absence of like qualified South African interpreters of foreign languages?
I
What would you have
think we
advised the mayor?
I think we're also speaking to two separate issues here. We also must be aware that the mayor has said about employing foreigners in our police stations as interpreters. But the mayor must also be aware that there are South Africans who speak foreign languages. These are our very students that exit our universities who may be foreigners or who have learned foreign languages and who are qualified interpreters. That's the first thing. So we might have, and I'm not saying that we do. Again, this would have to be research, but we might have to look into that avenue. At the same time, I'm cautious with the saying this. I don't want to exclude foreigners and their languages from South Africa or from our police stations. But we also need to look internally at our own languages and how we are serving South Africans who have problems encountering the police station. Let's be honest, that is our primary concern. And then we need to address the foreign language issue in our police station.
So, in
We,
other words, what you're saying is that the mayor actually jumped the gun because we have not managed to solve our own problems in this interpretation situation. I remember you often quote that case from Gqeberha, where that lady was reporting a case
yeah,
in this
yes,
close something different was written.
yes,
Uh, and so if it happens in a context of we have not perfected in our own languages, and you say that's the majority of cases in any case, and we have not brought in interpreters for that. Is that what you're
yes.
saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that we need to concentrate firstly. I'm not saying that we must exclude, before I'm misquoted, we must exclude foreigners and international compatriots. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to focus on our issues at home. And that is the first, for me, that's the first port of call. And we've got a lot of issues to sort out within the police from a point of statement taking. And you touch very aptly, Siki, on that case, which I've invested a lot of time on, and I really do feel for the complainant in that case. In fact, she was here in Mount Frere in the Eastern Cape, where we are. And, besides being deaf and not being able to communicate using standard South African Sign Language, in a sense, she was just voiceless. And we took that voice away from her because of the system in which she existed. And
Mm.
she was also isiXhosa and had no accord of English either. Neither did her sister, who was kind of her voice in a sense. And to see the misrepresentation, the mistranslation of what was said, how rape was mangled to translate to sexual assault, because euphemisms were being used. So in South Africa, Siki, and you can relate to this, we have our own euphemisms, especially I can speak from the Xhosa culture now. Um, when we talk about sexual acts and sexual organs, we don't go directly into a police station and you'll find an isiXhosa
Mm.
woman using those terms directly. If
Exactly.
it's a if it's a isiXhosa police officer, then he understands what that lady is saying to him. He's well aware of it. He's conversing with her or she's conversing with her in their mother tongue. There's a mutual
Mm.
understanding. But then, Siki, that police officer is now tasked, a linguistic task of transferring the isiXhosa into English because the statement process dictates that the statement be taken in English. because of our
Mm.
language of record policy. So everything has to happen in English. And that's something we need to get around. That's also an issue. So again, there are cultural gaps now to be filled. If we bring in the same thing is going to exist with foreign nationals, with their languages, as I'm sure they have
Yes.
cultural nuances in their languages.
Wow.
They have euphemisms. So we
Mm.
have an interpreter coming in. The same story applies, Siki.
Sure.
There's an interpreter coming in for a Kiswahili accused or for a Kiswahili complainant, and the interpreter is now providing interpretation, speaking directly to the complainant or the suspect. That's very well and good. Now comes the time to translate that into the statement, and the statement has to be recorded in English. So we're transferring between languages from Kiswahili to English. There's meaning lost there because we know there's no equivalence for some terms. So it's not only a foreign issue, it's also a South African issue. It belongs to both foreigners and South Africans.
So, I mean, it almost sounds like there's a whole language infrastructure, if you will, that isn't built, that is dysfunctional, that actually needs to be fixed before adding other fancy gadgets. If you want to call, languages that are outside of South Africa and bring them in and incorporating them when we haven't even sorted out um, this. And in some ways, this conversation really could highlight and hopefully help accelerate the South African issue
Yeah,
of
definitely.
justice, because if you cannot communicate, or if there is no proper communication um, in the forensic or justice, then the cases cannot really, you can't really get justice if there's insufficient communication that's satisfactory, that what's being communicated is really what's being communicated. It just really shows the cracks that could make or break a person's
Mm.
life,
No,
you know.
I hear you, Siki, and as you suggest, this has really shone the spotlight indirectly on our South African issues that exist, that we're well aware of, that we talk about all the time. But I think the way forward for me is for the police ministry, for for us as forensic linguists. Certainly, I've offered my services publicly to be of assistance, and for various government departments to come together and say, okay, we have this issue. What is the way forward? Let's address it. Let's find solutions. I mean, you know that we've done an extensive amount of research into police statement taking, how the statement should be recorded, the issues that have already come to the fore that we can solve. That's the first thing that we need to address. The second thing I think you asked me and I avoided your question is about AI and using other tools. And yes, this is on the cards, and I know this is now going to be made public, but I've already said this publicly last year at the PanSalb Albie Sachs Linguistic Human Rights Lecture. Dr. Annelies de Vries and I, as my colleague, is also a forensic linguist, and we work very closely. And the two of us are in the process of developing an app. And the app will aid what I've been talking about today in terms of bridging the gap between interpretation and translation, and complainants walking into a police station and recording their statement in their mother tongue, and it being digitally recorded and safeguarded digitally, and then an English translation being produced. So you'd have the digital version, just to break it down very simply, you'd have the digital version, which would be in the complainant's mother tongue or the accused mother tongue, and then you would have the translated English
Translation.
version. That was the statement. So two would go together. So when we get to court, we don't run that risk of saying, well, no, I didn't say that. But you did, because here it is. So we can find that cultural equivalence as well along the way. because we'll be dealing with professional translators, professional forensic linguists. And you know, Siki, everybody says to me and Annalise, is this going to be a fix-all type of app? It will be new and there'll be issues along the way, but I think this is a step in the right direction where we as forensic linguists are coming together and saying, well, let us see how we can solve these problems, because for such a long time we produce this endless amount of research that government and various other organizations appear to ignore, which is very sad, or you know, don't engage with us to solve a problem collectively. And we really are here to help. We want to improve the lives of all Indigenous language speaking citizens in the country.
Isn't the ideal situation for a language? So if I'm reporting something in Xhosa, shouldn't then, I get a Xhosa translator who translates into Xhosa if it's a South African language? Wouldn't that be a more ideal situation than everything constantly being translated to English?
That would be ideal. But unfortunately, because we have this language of record issue, so the language of record policy prohibits us from doing that because it prescribes that everything within the police docket needs to be sent to court and must be sent in English. So the
And there is
official
no chance of
statements.
that law changing. Is there no chance?
Well, that is a separate issue that unfortunately impacts our entire criminal justice system. And every conversation we have about language revolves around this language of record policy, which is extremely unfortunate. And we've sat with it for a very long time, since 2017, as you know. So I ideally, yes, the language of record policy, which is, you know, is my area of research, has to change. I don't think we can be sitting with it any longer. It's impractical, see.
No, it's
And
it's impractical.
it's impractical. It's having disastrous effects, as we even now see with police and within courtroom discourse, and how we really view languages as part of our legal system, and see access to justice and just social justice, really. So the language of record policy, I've always argued, should be informed by the judiciary, but should be a ministerial policy that is decided upon, like I said, with the judiciary, with the heads of court, the Chief Justice informing that policy, because they have insight as to what happens from a practical perspective. And then obviously the Minister of Justice from a more legislative policy perspective. And then you have us, the forensic linguists, the researchers, the legal linguists, who actually can drive this process and drive it in a sense of, here's the research, we've done it. Now let us help you find a practical solution or a practical policy. And again, for me, Siki, yes, I know we might need a language of record policy that's national, but I don't believe in that. I don't think it's going to work. Even if we change that language of record policy, we're still going to have problems, because which languages do we then choose? So for me, I would say we need to go with provincial language policies. That's our best bet, because those policies can be updated on a 5-yearly basis as Stats SA and Census produces their census. Then we need to change the policy, because language, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, is fluid. It's not something that remains static. And neither is the issue of foreign nationals and their languages coming into play now. So we've got to be cognizant of all these issues. Unfortunately, our research is up to date. It takes into account all of this, partnering and then with Stats SA and the National Census, informing it, say, to the judiciary and to the Minister of Justice and whoever else is involved. Here we go. This is sort of a policy plan that we've worked out, a framework for each province that's practical, that we could start implementing and then see. But you know, Siki, we cannot implement it. We cannot design a policy or draft it. We cannot implement a policy. And then when the policy fails, we throw up our hands and say, we tried, that's the end of the story, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, with a language question, that always happens. solutions. If something fails, then we give up and say, okay, we did try, but sorry, it didn't work. That just cannot happen. Then we need to go back and say, well, why did it fail? We need to improve it. And then that's part of policy development. That's part of the implementation plan, and it's about being positive and seeing change. And we cannot have a solution seeky tomorrow. When Dr. De Vries and I launched the app next year, we cannot be expected to see a change immediately. There will be issues that will need to be sorted out. It will have to be constantly developed, taking into account the changes in our society from a point of language.
Well, thank you very much. And we hope that Dada Morero, the mayor of Johannesburg, and it also looks like the Minister of Justice, this is something that she needs to be engaged on, and as well as the Minister of Justice in the various provinces. It looks like we've got our work cut out for us. So thank you so much for speaking to us. This is our chair, our brand new chairperson, who started this year, Dr. Zakeera Docrat. Thank you so much for talking to us. Have a great September, Heritage Month.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Siki.
Thank you. Well, thank you.